adults are just giant kids, right? All of us are. And given the capacity to play, that joyfulness comes out. One of my favorite parts of running these workshops is when people get to unbox or unbag their Lego and they start touching the pieces, and you see this like transformation happen. Like people, they smile. There's an instant smile, right? They're like, I'm playing with toys. And right, you just see this thing happen.
From the city of Peaky Blinders, Birmingham, England, I would like to introduce you to Paddy Danda.
As the world becomes more automated and the robots take over, it's imperative that we build the right human skills for the future. So pull up a chair, grab a samosa or two, and make yourself very uncomfortable. Dear friend, thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the Superpower School podcast. I'm your host, Paddy Danda, and on today's show, I have an amazing guest whose talk I saw at a conference. And it's been about a year, and it just goes to show how time flies. I have the amazing Brandon Wetstein on the show today. Hey, Brandon, how are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic.
And Brandon, tell me, where are you calling in from? Because I don't think it's the UK, is it?
No, I'm coming in from New York City.
New York. Wow.
New York, yes. A city so nice they named it twice.
Yes. And you're quite close to us, really, here in England, because when we think of America, we go, oh, yeah, it's like miles away. But actually, New York's pretty close. It's like 7 hours by flight, I think, something like that.
I think it's even less than that. I think it's more like 5. It's pretty. It's just a puddle jump, right? Just a little quick 5.5 hour flight. And we're together, just like that.
I mean,
nothing at all.
Depends if you've got the big money like yourself. You probably flew on a fast plane. I'm talking about my budget airline that I've probably flown.
You get on a cargo ship. Maybe it takes a week or two.
That's true. I'm watching a series at the moment, 1921. That the series? Yellowstone. Have you heard of the Yellowstone with Kevin Costner?
Oh yes, I'm familiar with it. I haven't seen it.
Yeah. So now they're like doing some prequels to it, and one's called 1921, I think. I might have that wrong. Is it 1931 or 1921? I don't know. But the guy's in Africa, and he has to then come back to the US, and it's going to take him months by ship. And there's no other way. He can't fly, because apparently back then they didn't have all the cool flights that we have now. So yeah, it just goes to show, like, way back, they must have really had to navigate using the kind of like slow transportation. We're used to speed now, aren't we? We were talking about speed just earlier. So which superpower are you bringing to this particular episode?
I am bringing connection and collaboration with teams using play. So playing in teams. That's it.
That's a cool job to do, right? Like, if imagine telling your kids, this is what I do for a living.
It's not even kids. Half the adults I meet are like, they're like, you do what? Like, how did you get into that? And I'm lucky. Like, I'm so lucky to do what I do. But yeah, right. It sounds so fun, and it sounds so amazing, and it is, because play is such a central part of who we are as people. If you think about it, right? It's how when you think of play, what do you think? You think of kids. It's the thing that pops into your head, right? Kids who naturally play. They never needed to be taught. None of us needed to be taught how to play as a kid. We just did it, right? Animals also, they play. It's this interesting, like, core dynamic to not only the human experience, but many animal experiences as well. And when you start to really dig into what it is and maybe some of the reasons why we might be doing it, it becomes quite powerful to think about. And then you wonder, like, well, why aren't we playing more? In fact, why aren't we playing all the time? Which is, I think we should be playing all the time. And not everyone agrees with me, but they're wrong. It's fun. It's enjoyable. It's how we learn. It's how we try things, right? You go back to that thing, watching kids, the experimentation, playing make-believe to try things on, to try roles, using your imagination, right? Driving creativity. And these are things that companies, especially today, they're like, this is what we want from our people. We want creativity, we want imagination, we want innovation, we want all this stuff that play can bring. But a lot of companies don't like play because it doesn't feel serious, right? It feels frivolous. And I'm not sure if that's because we associate play with children or if it's because it's too enjoyable to be considered work, possibly. But when you think of play, when you can get your imagination, your creativity going, stuff just starts to click better. And I know there's more science than I'm able to speak on out there, but a lot of I'm reminded of a TED talk with Sean Achor, who's into positive psychology, and part of his heavily watched TED talk from, I want to say, more than a decade ago, really talks about how when our brains are open and we're happy and we're enjoying ourselves and we're positive, we have better ideas, we have more ideas, we're able to see a larger scope of area. Yet when we're stressed, when we're under pressure, we tend to get very myopic, right? We only just see what's in front of us, and we don't have this the flexibility and openness. We have this rigidness because we're protecting ourselves. We're under a stressed type scenario. So it's this opposite of what we probably should be doing, especially in the workplace. We should be playing more to come up with these, creative, unique, and fun ideas. And I don't think I'm clearly not the first person to know there to believe in this, because I do think facilitators and trainers and folks everywhere have been using play for years, decades, I mean, for a long, long time. But I don't know that if we've always been as intentional as we could be about it. And I think now, especially, that we're more disconnected due to technology, right? We're more connected in some ways, but more disconnected in some ways. It becomes even more important to find those playful, creative ways to get us to connect and collaborate together.
I was looking or trying to look over your shoulder and see all the cool things you've got behind you. So, what are some of the things you have behind you there?
So, I mean, on this corner, I've got my Lego Serious Play box, and that is the primary methodology of play that I use with my company, Innate Create. And I just got some other Lego. I buy a lot of Legos, so that's my little one of the free kits I think I got for Chinese New Year this year, which I'm going to build this weekend. So I'm kind of excited to put together a little kit and do some play on my own. And I got a couple Lego cups. Actually, they might not be Lego branded. They were a gift, but I can put my actual Legos in there, Lego branded Legos. And the other one is just this little statue called Little Jizu. It's meant to be kind of like a mindful type thing. I rub his head sometimes for luck. It's smooth and soft and makes me feel centered. But all very playful things. I tend to try to live what I preach within the play atmosphere.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Yeah, I got to say, when I look around in my room, like there's the odd thing here and there, but it's not like stacked up behind me, which I probably need to do. I think that will be a great way of breaking the ice, I think. Like when you're on these corporate meetings or you're with a client, and I've noticed some people, they'll have a particular something, and when it's quite unique or it gets you to connect with your youthful sort of time of your life, it just creates such a meaningful conversation because you can really go deep with that.
It's I'm glad you bring that up because it's one of the things that I use play for is connecting people. And this wasn't my intention when I first learned this Lego Serious Play methodology. It was for these massive multi-day strategy sessions, and we're going to use they call it serious play because you're actually doing work, but it feels playful, right? You're talking about communication challenges and innovation and things like that. And what I found and what my core product is team building. It's getting people to know each other, and it's precisely the thing that you just said, right? It's finding those things that make us who we are, that are important, that reveal beliefs, joyful stories, memories, things like that. And this is actually what I do in a lot of my sessions is I get people to talk about themselves. But because our group dynamics are so funky in the way that we, especially at work, right? Because you've got hierarchy, you've got introversion, extroversion. Am I talking too much? Am I talking too little? How much can I share of myself? Do I really want to share myself? Like, what's the scenario in this work team? And now we're all virtual, so I barely know these people anyway. Whereas with play, suddenly instead of saying, "Hey, Patty, tell me about yourself," and you're like, "Okay, like what's the right realm here, right? I'm not going to give you a 10-minute dissertation of my life, but I need to share something. So what's this level of appropriateness in this space?" And with play, though, it's like I want you to build a model that tells a story about who you are outside of work. That's it. Very simple. There's no right answer. There's no wrong answer. You can include whatever you want to include. You can include a little. You can include a lot. Oh, by the way, you only have 3 minutes to build. Go. And when you're done, when you share, most people share within 30 seconds to 90 seconds because the model holds a ton of the information. And then it's just easy. It's playful. It's fun. And now it's like the magnifying glass is off of you, the person. It's more on, now it's on the model, right? So it's sort of like disembodiment, externalization. We're talking about this thing here, right? This pile of Legos that represents me, but suddenly it's easier to talk about this, right, than me. And then it's fun, it's goofy. People start laughing. They have fun ways that they start figuring out how to use the Lego to create stories. And yeah, it's just a blast. And you walk away after, most of my sessions are 90 minutes. It's fun. You learn a ton about each other. You had a good time. You played with Legos. Let's be honest, everyone pretty much loves Legos at this point. And it's a good time, right? And that's my love of play, is like we can do things that are serious and pull play into it and make it enjoyable and bring that creativity and bring that imagination. It doesn't have to be serious or play. It can be both.
And I was going to go back to a point you made right at the start about you said, "Oh, animals play," and I don't think many of us appreciate that. And I remember when I was in your session, you told a story about two animals. Could you tell us or regurgitate that story for us? Because I thought it was brilliant. I really thought it was good.
I mean, it's not my story by any means. It's a story of I don't remember the gentleman's name, but it was a person who, guy, I believe this was out in Alaska, had sled dogs, and he had his sled dogs, like chained up or tethered in some way, shape, or form. And he looks up and sees a polar bear walking up, and this polar bear looks like it's a pretty skinny polar bear. I mean, like, this doesn't look like this thing is eaten in a while, and he's too far away to get to the dog, and she's like, oh my gosh, this is not going to end well. And what happens in the story is the dog, it does this thing, it bows its head, and apparently in the animal kingdom, this is a very universal sign, at least with mammals, a universal sign of like an invitation to play in some way, shape, or form. Again, I'm not an animal scientist, this is just what I've read. But the bear reciprocates, and they start playing. And I think when you look at animals, when they play, right, they're usually we'd call it play fighting, I think, right? But they're wrestling around. It's very physical. Clearly, they don't have language, but they're wrestling around, and they're maybe nipping at each other, and just like you'd think of dogs or cats or other animals that play in that nature. But there's very distinct differences between actual fighting and play fighting, right? The fangs aren't bared. There's instead of having really rigid lines that are, when someone's tensed, they're very curvilinear, and yeah, they end up playing, wrestling around, and then apparently there's also like a universal signal for timeout, which is like they just lay down with their bellies exposed, right? And so now you got both the bear and the dog laying there with the belly exposed, and you're like, what an interesting thing to witness, to see happen, to, right, a bear and a dog wrestling around and playing. And so I think what's most interesting about the story, not only is the fun aspect of thinking, right, a couple animals playing, especially when you're in what could be a very fearful, tense, life-threatening situation, it's that we live in a world where evolution, right, weeds out things that aren't necessary. Yet play is pretty universal, which means there's some reason that we have it, right? It's whether the reason is connection, learning, right, with the many, many things that we get from play, and that animals themselves have this, and across species, right? And anyone who has an animal too, that you can play with the animal, right? Whether it's a laser dot pointer with your cat or playing tug of war with the dog. This thing is just weirdly universal across, and it's a way to connect. It's a way to enjoy your time. And it's so powerful to kind of think of like, yeah, this is core to who we are as a species, right? As a living being on this planet. It's kind of powerful.
Oh, for sure. Whenever I run agile training, for example, I will always try and incorporate some form of game, whether it's with Lego, or I have this one game where I get people to line up and they have to pass little bits of Lego to each other along the line, and they have to predict how many pieces they're going to get across to the other room. And every time they drop one on the floor, it's a defect. So kind of
Yeah.
delivering a product. And it's just so fun. And it's amazing, like when you add different game mechanics into the situation, how it can increase the competitiveness as well of people. Like if we just say, oh, you know what, we're not going to have any winners, it's just having a good time, blah blah blah, people get involved, but it won't be like to the extent of which they might be playing a computer game where they're like, really really trying to like beat the buddies. But then as soon as you say, oh, and for every time you get one over the line, you're going to get a point. Oh my God, that's it. Something triggers us inside and that competitiveness comes out. And it's so good to see. I was interested to know more about Lego Serious Play. So you mentioned that's one of the key areas within which you try and bring that play into your sessions. Could you tell us a little bit about the background of Lego Serious Play? What is it and how do you use it?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I ran across this in a previous role. I went to a demonstration session. Actually, someone had been certified in Lego Serious Play at one of the companies I was working at, and they needed to do some practice sessions. So I saw a invitation on our internal web and said, I'm gonna go show up because I'd never heard of this before. It's like, this sounds fun, and sure, right? I'm gonna take 2 hours out of work and go play with Legos in the middle of the day. Yes, please. And then I saw this, and it just stuck with me. Like, how in the world can we solve problems and challenges with Lego? And I started digging into it and reading some books, and it still never really fully hit. Even the demo session, it's like you kind of get a taste of what this is. And I finally just decided, I pulled the trigger and said, I want to go get certified in this method and learn all about it. And Patty, I fell in love with this session, and the certification took about a week. And it was like a full week in person. And what I learned through that is, so Lego built this in the late 90s, and they were really looking at their organization and went, we have this product that inspires creativity and imagination in children. Why can't we do that in our boardroom? How do we take that creativity and that imagination that comes from Lego bricks and building and exploring and bring that to the business side of what we do? And so that's what they set out to do. They actually set a separate organization up to start. It was called Executive Discovery. And this group, played and built and tried, and they finally ended up building it. They folded that little organization back into the Lego group. And for about 10 years, Lego actually sold this as a service. You could hire them. They would come out to your company and teach you how to do this Lego Serious Play. Specific kits like the one I have behind me here are built for this. And really the initial design was multi-day strategy sessions. And the way it works is you build stories. You build stories and you use metaphor and storytelling to specific questions. So as I told you before, within a team building question, the perfect example is, right, build a model that tells a story about who you are outside of work. Now, the key here, there's a couple main keys. One, the builder can't be wrong. There is no such thing as a wrong answer. So the key to these sessions is the questions that are asked. There's generally a lot of nuance that's happening in the answer. So if you ask people, what is 2 + 2, build a Lego brick to answer, well, okay, everyone's going to build some variation of 4. But if you ask people instead, what is the biggest threat to our strategy this year? Right? What is the one thing getting in the way of our success? What is, so on, so on, and so on. And so the art really does come into what type of questions you're asking, and then getting that nuance of perspective out on the table. Because here's what I've found in running sessions with this. When you do ask a question like that, once you get everyone's thoughts on the table, or their models built and what's shared, you'll find that although there's a lot of nuance between the answers, there's generally not a lot of disagreement, right? So if I were to get 10, 12 people in a room and say, what does world-class communication look like, right? Or what goes into world-class communication? I can even do 5 or 6 different questions that lead up to that. I'm going to get a bunch of different answers. very rarely am I going to get information or answers that people completely disagree with. They might like their answer better. And this is where, right, you shift from the interesting dynamics of verbal discussion in a group, because then you have this competitiveness, right? You have this, going back to your point, right? There's competition. There's, I want to sell my idea. I want to make sure that, right, I get credit. It's just, again, this part of how we are in groups, especially at work, because we're trying to look good. We're trying to do our part. But instead, that competitiveness shifts from me versus you to how do I get the most creative model? How do I tell this in a really interesting way? And that creative is almost creative, or that competition is inverted. And you start going, oh, wow, yeah, I like the way that people use the Lego to do this. How do I come up with the best way to talk about this answer? And suddenly, once everyone shares, they're like, yeah, everyone's kind of like, yeah, no one really has any issue with what anyone else has, right? These are all things that can go into amazing communication or world-class communication. Okay, cool, let's go on to the next step. Then no one gets in the way of world-class communication. And again, a bunch of nuanced, slightly different answers, but does anyone disagree with those? Not necessarily. So you really get this depth of understanding and listening to all the voices in the room. That doesn't happen with verbal conversations, because it's just, they're just the way that we interact with each other. It's just clunky, right? And it is human dynamics. It's the extrovert's going to always say 4 times what you want them to say sometimes, and the introvert who doesn't talk at all, you're like, we need your ideas on the table too. And so it helps balance that out. And it also keeps people very focused too, right? They can't really answer tangents, because we're not giving people a half hour. We're not saying build a giant spaceship, right? It's build this model. It looks like something a 5-year-old would make, right? It never looks like a thing. And some people will build, in more intricate models than others. But that's their competition. They're competing with themselves and their own creativity. And it honestly, what it does is it shocks people. It surprises people. You get deeper answers than you'd expect because that externalization. I've had people say like, "Oh, I didn't mean to share that much." But once you start building your thoughts and your answers, and it comes out in Lego bricks, well, yeah, it's kind of there, and you share it. You're kind of like, well, okay, maybe I wouldn't have said that. But now that it's in Lego form and it's playful and it's easy, yeah, right. Maybe I can talk about the elephant in the room a little bit more. So I fell in love with this when I first saw it, and I still think there are so many applications for it. There are more and more facilitators being certified, and I love it. I think the more of this we have, the better. You can't use it for everything, but when it really counts, when you really want to get some nuanced information out there, or you really want to tackle a tough topic, or just get people to connect and play around something, it's amazingly powerful, and I think it sneaks up on people for sure.
How do you use Lego Serious Play virtually? Is it still possible to reap those rewards, or does it become much more challenging?
Yes to both. So it does reap rewards, but you lose the capacity to do certain kinds of build types. So in person, you have the capacity to do collective builds or team building together. And so there's really about a handful of different ways to build. There's the individual build, which is the most powerful, right? You get your own pile of Lego bricks, you build your model, and then you have a chance to hold it up and share. And then you get the team build, which is a little bit more complex. And then you have to people are working together to build. That's impossible to do online. And you can do it virtually. Over the pandemic, I played with a few other facilitators of like, well, okay, what if we made Lego bricks in a virtual whiteboard? And you can do it, but you lose the capacity. Like the benefit of doing it is lost as to what you could normally do in person. At the same time, even with doing those individual builds, you still get a lot of perspective. You can still get the benefits of externalization, of building via model. So it's lessened, but it still can be impactful when done in the right way.
Yeah, I was going to say, just that ability to be able to touch and feel the different Lego blocks, and I just can't see how you can replicate that, like you say, on a virtual environment. No matter how good like computer games and graphics are, just not that same feeling, is it? So yeah, that's a tough one.
Well, it's the psychology around it too. Is when we speak verbally, we're accessing somewhere between 65 to 75% of the neurons in our brain are tied to our hands. There's something called a cortical homunculus. If you go look it up, and it shows, it reframes the body as to where all of your nerves are really tied to. and your neurons. And so our hands are gigantic because touch, right? We need tons of sensory information. Clearly our eyes, our mouth, everything that has senses tied to it has way more neurons tied to it because that's where we need to receive and understand information. And the hands are like so connected to so many parts of our brain. And so when we're talking, like you and I right now, we're mostly accessing our prefrontal cortex, right, which is our logic center of the brain. But when you start using your hands, you light up so many more of your neuron networks. You're actually able to access more information. A lot of that subconscious information that isn't necessarily right at the tip of your tongue, you can get to when you start using your hands. One of the tips that I use and was taught and when certified in this methodology is that if you're not sure of what to build, because sometimes when you ask a complex question, right, like what's your team identity? Ooh, wow, how am I going to answer that in 5, 6, 7 minutes with a pile of Legos? Is to use your hands. Like, don't sit there and think, don't sit there and have a meeting with yourself. Like, go in and start using pieces and just grab stuff. And what can happen, and I've had people come back and tell me, like, this worked many, many times, is that your hands can inform your brain of the answer. So just having that tactile feel and lighting up your brain and lighting up those neural networks and getting things firing, you can actually access more information in your brain than you might be able to verbally, which is really cool, right? When you think of like trying to come up with ideas or perspectives or thoughts, let's use more of our brain, right? Let's get those hands involved.
It's incredible because when I've run those Lego games that I was mentioning for Agile courses, I was initially reluctant to put the Lego on the table at the start because you know what happens, like it's just human nature. As soon as we see Lego on a table, the first thing we do, go and grab it, right? And everyone's messing around and I'm hearing it clunking and clinking and all those sounds and I'm trying to talk and I'm like, oh God, this is so distracting. But actually now I just let people do what they want. Like, you know, and you'll just see people building these amazing things, even though I've not asked anybody to do anything right now with the Lego. Yeah. It's just so cool to see that playful side coming out. And I just think that's magical when you see like people in shirt and tie and looking very formal and then they're like building these crazy creations. Super cool.
The adults are giant kids. Can we just the one thing if I can have like one of the biggest takeaways of what I've been doing for the past 5 years now, adults are just giant kids, right? All of us are. And given the capacity to play, that joyfulness comes out. One of my favorite parts of running these workshops is when people get to unbox or unbag their Lego and they start touching the pieces and you see this like transformation happen. Like people, they smile. There's an instant smile, right? They're like, I'm playing with toys. And right, you just see this thing happen. And then especially when you stand outside and you look at the dynamics and you look how people interact with one another, like we're still all just giant kids. Like we pretend like we're grown up, but that's something we made up at some point, right? That kid is still alive in every single person without a doubt.
And Brendan, do you have like some favorite games, icebreakers, energizers that you run? Because like I remember the one you ran for us in your session. I think I've actually pinched that, so I'm going to let you know now. I use that in a session that I ran because I just thought it was brilliant. But yeah, I'd love to hear some of your examples of ones that are kind of your go-to.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I pinched that from someone else too. So it was an improvisation. Honestly, I love improv games. I think improv. The thing that you have to be careful, I think, with improv is you don't call it improv because like improv inspires fear in the certain groups of people. But if you take exercises from improv, so that game was a playoff of, I think I was calling it Llamas and Lions, and right, people just list off as many things. Like those types of games that get people out of their own head, those are my favorite. One of my favorites is a very similar one to that, where if you're doing small groups, it was called Plan a Party, and this one it's good for like brainstorming type warm-ups. But if you get a group of 4 or 5 people around and you start them off with plan a party, you're planning a party, and every person, come up with an idea, and then the entire group shoot it down, say no. Right, this ties into kind of the yes and philosophy of improv. And then you do that. You go around and you give them like, I want to say 30 seconds or 40 seconds, not a whole lot of time. But what you find is it's just like people stop wanting to share ideas, like almost automatically. It's just like, they're like, let's do this. And then the next person's going, no. And then you share an idea. And the next person shares an idea. And the next person says no. And then you're like, well, how did that feel? Right? Well, it sucked. It wasn't fun, anything. And then you do the whole yes and, right? Okay, so next time let's do the yes and, right? Agree with them, add something. Agree with them, add something. Agree with them, and then let them go a little bit longer. I usually kind of let the room because it'll start kind of goofy, and then the laughter will start going, and then you go around and you let people share like what kind of party did you have, and of course it's just insane, like crazy things that nothing realistic. But they're having a blast. They're laughing. They're having a good time, and I think it really pulls in that whole yes and, like, let's withhold judgment on things. Don't say no. Right? Let things live. Let them breathe. Add on, and yeah, it's more fun. It's more enjoyable. Right? Saying yes creates more ideas, and yeah, sometimes you need the wild and crazy things to inspire the true solution you might be looking for. So that's probably one of my favorite ones because it shows the juxtaposition of judging things very quickly versus just saying yes and let's agree. You can judge later down the road when we have to make a decision.
Oh, I love that. Again, I'm going to steal some of that.
Yeah, please do. Like, these are all things I stole from I didn't come up with these. So.
And so with that playful approach, what sort of sessions are these techniques more suited towards? So like if somebody out there is thinking, you know what, I'm running a workshop or a meeting and I've heard Brandon talk about this play thing, and I think I'm going to be brave enough to incorporate some games into that. Are there situations where you think like it might not be such a good idea, or can it be universally used literally in every situation?
Universality, yeah, a bit universal's tough because you really have to look at like what is the intent of the session that you're running. Is it to gain alignment? Is it to make a decision, right? Is it to come up with ideas? The more open-ended the session, the more I think you can get a little bit wild and crazy with the play. The more the outcome is very specific, you need to be extremely intentional with the play because at some point there is a balance of frivolity and fun and right what we'd call like edutainment or train. I think there's a training combination of a word. I forget what it is, but yeah, like are we just here having fun and coming up with goofy ideas? Which there's a time for that. And then there's a time where you need to truly make a serious decision. I always work backwards, right? What is the outcome? What do we really need to get to it? What are the steps? And then how can I put play into that if it makes sense? Because again, we want to get that creativity and we want that imagination. But yeah, sometimes we do actually need to achieve things at some point, right? We need to get things done. The clients that hire me, they're not just saying, hey, come on in and have fun. Don't get me wrong. I like that. That happens sometimes with some of our team building. But one of the biggest goals of our team building is getting people to know each other, right? Creating connection, and that's the main goal. And fun is the vehicle that we use to get there. So I think, yeah, it's really outlining what is the outcome you're going for, and then how can you weave play into that journey to make that outcome better, right? How do you get that best outcome? And if play is helping that, then absolutely use it for sure.
And can you think of a time where you had a group of people where initially there was kind of reluctancy or there was cynicism, and you saw a transformation happening in the group? Can you share a story or two?
Oh my gosh. I feel like I think I've got to the point where I just don't notice it anymore, but initially, yeah. I mean, there's always, right? You put 25, 30 people in a room and you're going to get a cynic somewhere, right? Without a doubt. I think my favorite one was I was doing a senior leadership session on, we were just reviewing strategy and the annual plan, and we were looking at risks. And so we were using the individual builds, and we got into a group build section, and these are all C-level, pretty big company too. And at one point, there's a part in the shared model building where you create a story. You pull a story together of all these elements, and you're combining elements from your individual. I believe we were building models of success for the year. And so if you have a model of success for logistics and a model of success for legal and a model of success, all of these things need to somehow blend and come together to create a story. And someone decided that they didn't want to be part of telling the story, which I thought was hilarious. I'm like, here we are, this group of C-level, right? This goes back to the whole all adults are kids. This was just the stubborn kid who's like, I don't want to play. But she was in the group with her CEO, and so on the fly, and I didn't run things like this initially, but this has now become a rule that I use. I tell them like everyone has to be able to tell the story, because the idea is like everyone's supposed to understand and get a view of the success of everyone else. That's the idea. That's the point of this exercise. And so if you're not willing to learn the story, then you're not doing the work on the workshop. And so I let this, leader know that I'm like, okay, you can do that, but I'm going to let the other team decide who presents on your team. And if you don't know what you're talking about, your entire team is going to get let down. And her CEO was in her group, and he was standing there, and he just started laughing. And she played along. Like, she needed some competitive edge. She needed a level to do it. And so she got into it. I think that was an empty threat. I still think I let them choose the person that would do it. But it got her in, and she started playing, and she enjoyed it, and she got there. But again, sometimes, especially these are very high stakes meetings, right? And so people want to make sure there's a control aspect, and they want to make sure they're in control. And sometimes you do have to play with the rules a little bit to, give them either a reason to play along, or a feeling of enough safety that like, hey, like we're telling stories with Legos, like, it's okay. More often than not, I think the cynics just see everyone having fun and laughing, and I think they just give in and decide they want to play too, because there's a point where everyone else is having a good time. Are you going to still sit there and be the curmudgeon? Usually not.
It reminds me of a time I was in India for a bank that I used to work for, and a friend of mine and we were running a session. It was a training session, and it's never happened to me before in India where the group's energy was like flat, right? I have normally had the most amazing experiences with every cohort I've ever had in India. But just this one day, it felt like they just weren't as engaged as they possibly could. And got to about lunchtime, and Kerry, who was my colleague, I turned to her. I said, Kerry, is something wrong? It's just not working. And she said, you're right. I said, do you mind if I try something? And she was like, no, go for it. And after lunch, I came in and I started writing some numbers on the board. And after a while, somebody puts up their hand. They go, oh, excuse me, like, what are those numbers representing? I said, oh, they're your scores. And they were like, what do you mean? You were scoring us? I said, yeah. I said, that's the scores from the activities we did this morning. Oh my God. It was like they wanted to beat me up. It was, whoa, you didn't tell us that. And how do you score? Why has that team got a higher score than our team? And there was like all of these questions coming out. And I was like, because that's my decision. I don't need to tell you the scoring scheme. This is just the way I'm doing it. And they were like furious. So anyway, we then went into the next activity. Oh my God, Brendan, they were so engaged. And I remember one lady, she kept saying, well, our team only has 5 people. Everyone else has 6. We need a number 6. We need a number. And she kept saying this all afternoon, and it became this running thing. Eventually I started calling her number 6. I was like, look, number 6, it doesn't matter. And it just goes to show, like, as soon as you add some form of mechanic or dynamic from that kind of gamification space, it can really change things. And it was magical to watch that sort of transformation. And I'm sure like your session as well, where you saw this person completely going no, and then next minute they're fully involved.
Right. I mean, it goes back, I think, really right to these group dynamics, and and I'm really just loving this, the whole idea of team, whole idea of groups. You're right. How do we work with one another? It's so interesting and so messy when you think about it, right? There's still all these like animal instincts, right? Where there's the alpha person that's like, I want to take over and be in charge and make decisions, and then right there's the person that doesn't want to be there and that's just checked out. And this is just constantly what groups are working with in organizations, in their social life, and all of these things. And I mean, my view on this right now, and what inspires me, is I think now more than ever, we need play. We need ways to connect with one another, because we are all our technology is giving us convenience, but it's disconnecting us, right? And when we're together, when we're in person, we have all this biology, right? We have things like oxytocin, right? Our chemical makeups change. Our heartbeats can sync. If when someone yawns, everyone else yawns. When someone smiles, everyone else smiles. There's all these things that happen when we're together. And technology can't fix for that, at least not now, right? Yet we're more divided, and things like, we know this from the data that's come out on things like social media, right? People are way more lonely than they've ever been. And so these connection points are much more important than ever. And especially with AI coming out, I think the true work of people moving forward is going to be in groups, right? The things we're trying to tackle are so much more complex. And yes, AI is going to be, I think it's going to be an awesome tool that's going to help us fix a lot of things, but it's going to be a tool that's used by a group of people who can work together intelligently, smartly. And how do we get the best out of everyone? I mean, it's time for more play. It's time for more connection. This is why I love my analog tools, because I think it's just refreshing, right? It's get off a screen for a little bit and just connect truly with play and where we're headed. That's the future. Future's analog with digital tools.
Love it, love it. And I find the same as well, Brandon. When I run like visual thinking sessions, when we're doodling and I get people to draw along, that is just pure analog, and we're not using any fancy tools or apps or anything like that. And people just connect with that. And it is amazing when you almost disrupt the common pattern, because people normally would get together and we're just so used to being on autopilot. Oh, okay, so now the facilitator is going to put this agenda on the slide, and then we're going to do this, then we're going to do that. As soon as you disrupt it a little bit, like you have, you come in with your box of Lego and everyone's like intrigued and curious. It just creates a different atmosphere for sure.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think that's right. Any workshop session, that's the fun of it, right? And speaking for myself, I've only been doing Lego Serious Play for about 5 years, but previous to that, design thinking, I mean, any methodology that could I started my career working in retail stores and selling electronics, and we would have meetings every morning, and there's a point where you're like, we need to make this fun and engaging, because like people are like, yeah, it's the kind of the same type of stuff. So we would create games and create ways to make it fun and enjoyable. So again, right, I think there's just this thing of play that connects us, that breaks down barriers, that allows us to understand each other, that allows us to, communicate in a easier way and see each other as people, right? Like going back to your initial point, asking about the things in my background, there's so much depth and dimension to each person that when we work together, it gets transactional to a point, because we're all trying to be so efficient with our time, right? If I just do X, if I just do Y, and sometimes getting to know a person a little bit more does take time. It takes effort, but then working with that person, connecting with that person, playing with that person, that's where the joy comes from, right? That's where friendships start. That's where relationships start. That joy of understanding is seeing the depth and dimension behind each person. It's truly valuable.
And going along with the theme of play, I'm going to ask you one of my favorite questions, which I didn't give you any warning on. If I could give you any superpower in the world to abolish something in the world of work, so if we can get rid of something, what would that be for you, Brandon? And we're going to do it for 24 hours because we're going to run a test.
Okay. I like this. I would... I'm torn. There's like 5 of them in my head right now. I think I'm going to start
You can have more than one. I don't mind. You can do more than one if you want.
I think I would abolish... the two that I'm torn between is anger and fear. And I think they're very intertwined. And I think the thing that gets in the way of work is anger and fear of connecting, of sharing ideas, of maybe not getting your way, of maybe looking vulnerable. Like there's so many things that stop us from being our best self. And that's the reason I love play, is I think it takes that stuff and chucks it to the side. And so, yeah, I think, if I could abolish anger and fear, those two would be that would be my choice. Choices.
Oh, amazing.
2, I guess. Breaking the rules.
Well, and I think through your techniques of play, you're kind of abolishing those things, right? You're able to at least suppress them in a different way.
Exactly. Yeah. I always love the inspiration that really, I have been some type of facilitator for my entire life. Right now, easier looking back, hindsight being 2020. I've always facilitated groups and meetings and things like that. But one of my favorite moments was rolling out design thinking in one of the organizations that I worked in. And I always worked in operations. And so operations is a very black and white area, right? It's very like, we make the rules. And so there's kind of like, there's this way or that way, or no, this is some clear cut delineation. And the organization was going through a transformation where they were trying to get people to think more like a startup, right? We want people to have ideas and try things and embrace failure. But this in a big company, you're like, the sarcastic answer is like, so if I try something and lose $1 billion, I'll be okay. And you're like, okay, because no one was giving tools, no one was saying how to do it. They were just saying try to do this. And I ran a design thinking workshop where I don't remember what it's about. I think the topic was null, but I had operators in there that were a little resistant to start with. But I remember a person who I worked with on my team that like just lit up, and this person was normally a little shy, a little reserved, but started just having all these ideas, right? This and that, and was just loving it. Was having so much fun. And the potential that was locked in that one person, I was just like, I honestly just like, this is like, oh my gosh, that was fuel for me. Like, I want to do more of this. I want to help more people find that space where they weren't allowed to do that before, right? Because of whatever the way the meetings were structured or the way that, judgment was passed around, which again, you're in operations, right? There's a certain level of, you have to judge things, right? There's a point where you have to do that. But the way that person lit up was just like, it was so empowering for me and so inspiring for me that I still keep that at the core of everything that I do.
Oh, amazing. And Brandon, if people want to get in touch with you and find out about the great things that you do, how can they do that?
Absolutely. You can find me, best place is my website, innatecreate.com. We are also launching a podcast as well, which I'll chat with you about more, Patty, called Herding Squirrels, Herding, not hurting, herdingsquirrels.com, about teams and modern team inspiration, leadership. We're all squirrels and teams are nuts. So, hey, let's have some fun with it. And or you can find me on LinkedIn as well, Brandon Wetstein. I'm sure the name will be in the notes somewhere. So I'll be out there. Feel free to reach out and connect.
Oh, I love that concept of herding squirrels. That sounds so cool. Yeah, I can just picture these little creatures just running around everywhere. Oh my God.
Oh my gosh.
Love it. Well, Brandon, it's been such a pleasure connecting with you again. And yeah, always love our conversation. So thank you so much, and really good luck with the podcast as well. So can't wait for that.
Thank you so much, Patty. Appreciate it. Thank you for having me. This has been wonderful.
It's the end of another episode. Thank you so much for listening. Please do connect with me via LinkedIn and drop me a message and let me know your favorite takeaways from the episode. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Superpower School newsletter so that you can be notified of all future episodes. Simply visit the website www.superpowers.school. Thank you once again.